us off at number 10 is death by water. One of the fundamentals of human life is that we need water to survive. Not only that, we're made up of approximately 60% water. We sweat water, we clean ourselves with water, and essentially rely on it to get through the day. So what happens when someone is allergic to water? Well, their life becomes about 100 times more complicated. One of the biggest mysteries in the medical field is an extremely rare condition called aquatogenic urticaria, where the skin breaks out into extremely painful hives or rash anytime it's exposed to water. As of a 2013 medical review, only 37 cases have been reported since 1964, most of which were female, as well as most reporting the condition only arose during or right after puberty began. What's insane about this condition is that not only are the afflicted often allergic to rainwater, snow, fresh water, and seawater, but many are allergic to their own sweat and tears, and even worse is that some people get rashes or welts on their lips and mouth area from just trying to drink enough water to stay alive. While there are a few theories out there about what could cause this peculiar nightmare condition, the underlying cause has never been confirmed and continues to perplex the medical community to no end. Coming in at number 9, stone tears. When Chandi was 15, she woke one morning feeling like there was something stuck in her eye. To her surprise, when she went to go and look in the mirror, there was a small stone in her eye, appearing to be coming from her tear duct. Ever since that day in July of 2021, Chadni and her family say that the young girl has cried stones out of her eyes several times a day, every day, and no one has any clue why, or frankly how, this could be happening. Allegedly, in just the 2 months since the ordeal began, Chadni collected nearly 70 stones that had fallen out of her eyes. The family lives in a small rural village in India, and they don't have much money to send her to specialists, but have posted videos online to try and get help for their daughter. According to the doctors that weigh in, there is no known existing condition that could be associated with this, so it's definitely disturbing, especially considering that from what anyone can tell, nothing seems to be out of the ordinary in her actual eyes. Now, truth be told, there are some doctors out there who think it could be a hoax, but nothing has been confirmed, and honestly, no one really knows what is going on. Next up at number 8, the Iceman. You know how there are people out there who like to do a morning cold plunge? Well, one man, Wim Hof, nicknamed the Iceman, seems to have taken that to a whole new level. Born in the Netherlands in 1959, Hof is, as it seems, immune to freezing temperatures. At the age of 17, Hof said he had a sudden impulse to strip down and jump into a half-frozen canal, and it's not that he felt nothing, but he was able to withstand it for far longer than should have made any sense. This turned him into developing what he calls the Wim Hof method, which he says combines frequent exposure to cold paired with special breathing techniques along with yoga and meditation. In fact, Hof set the Guinness World Record for prolonged full-body contact with ice and for swimming under ice in 2000. Then in 2012, curious about if it really was all some breathing technique or if he was some kind of medical marvel, researchers in the Netherlands examined samples of Hof's blood and determined that he was somehow able to manipulate his immune system at will, essentially stopping his body from going into a stress response due to the temperature. Now, sure, does his deep breathing help regulate the body? Of course, but Hof would have you believe it's all in the technique. However, there have been several tragic deaths from people attempting his method and subsequently freezing themselves to death, so maybe there is a little more to the story. Coming in at number 7, a human chimera. Due to the nature of how lives are brought into this world, if there's one thing that is never up for debate, it's generally the biological mother of a person. However, one woman named Karen Keegan found herself in the most bizarre and baffling situation. In 2002, Karen was in need of a second kidney transplant after her first one failed, so she underwent genetic testing with her family to see if any of them would be a match and able to donate her. So imagine Karen and her doctor's surprise when the test suggested that genetically, while all her children were siblings, she was not the biological mother of 2 of the 3 children she brought into the world. Her doctor assumed this had to be a mistake, and so they tested once more, but strangely, the results were the same. As it turns out, Karen was a chimera, which is a person composed of two genetically distinct cellular lines. Essentially, it turns out that the DNA in her blood was different from the DNA in her ovaries, a phenomenon that her doctor hypothesized came from two eggs that were fertilized very early on and fused together when Karen was a fetus in her own mother. Okay, so maybe this one isn't a totally unsolved medical mystery, but you have to admit it's pretty wild. Next up at number 6, foreign accent syndrome. Imagine waking up one morning and suddenly talking in a completely different accent than you have your entire life. While some people might think that you're doing a bit, believe it or not, there is an actual mystery called foreign accent syndrome, or FAS, where the very thing can happen. Most famously was the case in 1941 when a Norwegian woman suffered a traumatic brain injury during an air raid and suddenly and uncontrollably began speaking with a strong German accent. But others include an American woman who suddenly spoke in a mixture of Australian, Irish, and British after a car accident, as well as an Australian woman who suddenly spoke with a French accent after going to sleep with a headache. For a while, it was regarded as a psychological disorder. However, it is now associated as more of a neurological one, usually onset by head trauma or a stroke. But the part that scientists have not been able to wrap their brains around is how on earth people can seemingly speak in an accent they have never been exposed to. When learning to speak, your natural accent is a result of sound patterns you unconsciously learn, otherwise known as the phonetic system. When you are young, accents can shift as you become exposed to new speech patterns, but by the time you reach your teen years, your phonetic system is pretty much locked in. But FAS somehow affects the entire patterning of your phonetic system and continues to perplex doctors all over the world. Next up at number 5, no appetite. Sometimes when you're feeling under the weather or on certain medication, it's not uncommon to find that your appetite has gone down. However, anyone who has ever met a teenager can attest that of all the people, they are usually the last to lose their appetite. But back in 2013, a 12-year-old named Landon Jones from Iowa baffled doctors after he suddenly woke up one morning feeling faint and with a horrible cough. His parents wasted no time immediately rushing him to the hospital, where it was discovered he had an infection in his left lung, and while the infection was promptly treated, the worst of it was yet to come. For whatever reason, ever since that day, Landon has never had any kind of appetite or thirst. The boy rapidly started losing weight, going from 104 pounds to just 68 right before his parents' eyes, all seemingly due to the fact that he never felt a hunger or thirst cue. As he continued losing weight, his parents were growing more and more worried about their son's strange condition. But no matter what doctor they took him to, they could never get an answer as to what was happening to him. Landon was given countless brain scans, psych evals, medical evals, and tested to make sure he didn't have an eating disorder, but nothing was providing them with an answer. Some doctors have wondered if he suffers from a brain dysfunction in the hypothalamus, the part that controls hunger and thirst, but his case remains unsolved. Next up at number 4, Syndrome X. When Brooke Greenberg was born in 1993, she weighed a mere 4 pounds and had a hip dislocation. Luckily, the hip issue was fixed through a surgery, and although 4 pounds is generally revered as small for a newborn, she was premature and nothing else seemed off, so from what doctors could see, she appeared to be perfectly healthy. However, things started becoming mysterious around the time she was 4 or 5 years old, as her parents and doctors noticed that Brooke appeared to have stopped growing. As the years went by, Brooke remained virtually unaged, a phenomenon that confused every single medical professional that her family seeked out. By the age of 20, she still looked the same as she had when she was 4 years old, measuring less than 3 feet tall and weighing only about 16 pounds. And it wasn't only her appearance that had stopped progressing. Brooke communicated as an infant would, giggling when happy, crying when sad, and continued to wear diapers. Interestingly, the only thing that continued to grow as normal were Brooke's hair and nails. The family took her to endless specialists over the years looking for answers to their daughter's condition, but each one was just as perplexed as the next. Some simply said not to worry and that she would catch up, while others prescribed growth hormones, but nothing ever seemed to help their daughter grow. Doctors were completely stumped by this poor girl's condition, calling it Syndrome X, and ever since her death at the age of 20 in 2013, specialists have yet to come up with an explanation. Coming in at number 3, eyes shut. When Natalie Adler was 17, she awoke one morning to find that her eyelids were mysteriously swollen. While this was definitely alarming to Natalie, she didn't initially think much of it. Maybe it was allergies or something along those lines. However, next thing she knew, the condition was only getting worse. Her eyes started to become so swollen that she eventually wasn't able to open them up at all. Even stranger was that it began developing into an inexplicable cycle where they would spasm shut for 3 days, and then they would open for 3 days, and it did that for 13 years. By the time she was 30, doctors were still at a loss for what was causing her rare condition. A condition that is so rare, in fact, that it doesn't even have a name. And even after hundreds of tests, they are no closer to understanding her condition. Over the years, Natalie has undergone several surgeries, none of which have proved successful, however said that she does get Botox injections to help keep her eyes partially open, although she continues to suffer from random bouts of blindness each month. Although doctors have yet to come any closer on how to cure her condition, she continues to see eye specialists, hoping that one day her medical mystery will be solved. Coming in at number 2, twins. There are lots of different kinds of perplexing conditions that have popped up in the medical world over the years, but one of the wildest has to be the story of Sanju Bhagat. Most of his life, Sanju had been incredibly self-conscious about his large stomach, which he described as once being so big he appeared to be 9 months pregnant. What's even more shocking is that for whatever reason, he never received any kind of medical attention for his protruding belly. That was until one day in 1999 when Sanju began to experience shortness of breath and was rushed to the hospital. When he got there, the doctors assumed Sanju had a large tumor in his abdomen and rushed him into the operating room to remove it. However, instead of an enormous tumor they expected, they could not believe their eyes when they opened him up and found the remains of a half-formed twin that had been living inside of him the last 36 years. The condition, called fetus in fetu, is incredibly rare, having only been documented 90 times in medical literature throughout history. As it turns out, when Sanju had been in the womb, his twin had become trapped inside and essentially became a parasite. Most that suffer this condition do not live long, often not even surviving inside their own mother, so doctors were completely flabbergasted and unable to explain how this man had lived 36 years with the twin inside of him. And last up today in our number 1 spot, no pain. While most of the time we try to avoid it since you know it hurts and it isn't fun, knowing that you are in pain is actually really important because it helps you keep from getting more hurt. Like when you burn your arm on the 400-degree oven rack and it hurts like hell, so you immediately move your arm away. Or maybe you break your ankle and it obviously hurts, so you stop walking, thus hopefully stopping you from making it even worse. So with that in mind, imagine a life where nothing was telling you you were in pain. Well, that's exactly what Gabby Gingras has had to deal with her whole life. Now 23, Gabby has never felt a semblance of pain her whole life. As a little one, her parents said she would chew her hands until they looked like raw meat, but would never cry, and it was then that they knew something was not right. Then a few years later, Gabby scratched herself blind in one eye and had to wear goggles to sleep until she was old enough to understand her condition. As a kid, she routinely, unwittingly injured herself, once knocking out all of her teeth, another time getting second-degree burns from standing too close to a radiator, and even broke her own jaw but had no idea for several weeks. Even seemingly small things like weather conditions don't faze her. She has to be reminded to wear a coat in the winter so she doesn't get frostbite, or stand in the shade in the summer, as she's completely unaware of how to gauge temperature. Her condition is called hereditary sensory autonomic neuropathy, or HSAN, and while there is no cure, and the cause of the condition remains a big question mark to medical professionals, with proper support and learning from an intellectual perspective what can be dangerous, most people can thankfully live a totally normal life.
Alright. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Henry Baltimore Jr. In 1973, Henry was a 21-year-old honors student at the University of Michigan who had a very promising future ahead of him. In March of that year, Henry was unfortunately attacked inside of his apartment. 2 men broke in and tied him to the bed before stealing both money and material items. Henry was reluctant to report this incident to the police, but did end up doing so. After this, a suspect named Roy Davis was arrested and charged with armed robbery, and Henry was scheduled to testify at his hearing, but never showed up. 2 days after the hearing, Henry did resurface and asked the prosecutors to drop the charges because he was frightened, but they refused and Henry was rescheduled to testify. 2 days before this rescheduled hearing, Henry ended up disappearing very suspiciously. Originally, people believed that he may have gone into hiding considering how vocal he was about being frightened, but that belief quickly went away and people began to suspect something a lot more sinister was at play. Henry's family especially knew something was wrong because there was no way that he would disappear without telling at least one of them. Without Henry and his testimony, Roy ended up taking a plea deal and only was sentenced to 6 weeks. Roy was of course considered a person of interest in Henry's disappearance, and a neighbor of Henry's even said that they saw Roy and another man knocking on Henry's door the day he disappeared, but Roy's mother offered her son an alibi. Roy has never been formally charged for the disappearance. The two theories of what happened to Henry are either that someone abducted and took the life of Henry to prevent him from testifying, or Henry left Michigan, changed his identity, and assumed a new name. You would have hoped if it was the latter, he would have at least told one of his family members. His case remains open almost 50 years later, and who knows, if someone out there who's watching this video knows something about this case, please call in and give any and all information over to the authorities. The remaining family members of Henry deserve to know what happened to this extremely bright young man. In our number 9 spot today, we have Cody James and Gary Harker. Cody James and Gary Harker were longtime friends who were working together on Christmas Day in 1979 in Moline, Illinois. They left Cody's shop to head out in the truck to deliver an air compressor to Rock Island, Illinois, and then head to pick up a $500 payment for it in Davenport, Iowa, which they never made it to. The black truck they were driving was found almost 2 months after they had gone missing, and subsequently was put up for auction after not being claimed for 40 days. The bodies of Cody and Gary were found in the truck bed by the men who ended up purchasing it. 25 years after their deaths, the case was still unsolved, and a friend of Cody and Gary brought police a roll of film that they had been entrusted to by the men. When Cody and Gary gave their friend this film all those years earlier, they said, quote, "If anything happens to us, develop this film." It is crazy to think that this friend waited 25 years to spill this tea, and that perhaps the men knew what was going to happen to them. Unfortunately, the film didn't end up giving police any solid leads, although the case continues to be investigated. In our number 8 spot today, we have Christopher Wallace, also known as the Notorious B.I.G. Christopher Wallace is much better known by his alias, and he was one of the most famous rappers of the 1990s. And even though he was just getting his start, he is considered one of the best rappers of all time. Biggie was a New York rapper, but he was unfortunately killed in March of 1997 after a drive-by shooting while he was in Los Angeles. In 1996, the tensions between the East and West Coast hip-hop and rap scenes were rising, and after the death of Tupac in Las Vegas, rumors began to swirl about Biggie and his possible involvement in that killing. Unfortunately, the people who killed Biggie have never been found, and that is where the mystery comes in. There are a lot of similarities between the killings of Big and Tupac, and since neither of them are solved, there are so many rumors about what exactly happened. Some theories span from a gang member with financial motives to a planned hit by a record company in order to boost sales. There is so much speculation and so many possibilities surrounding this, and I really hope that one day we find out who committed this unbelievable crime. Notorious B.I.G. was only able to release 1 album before his death, but had 3 albums released posthumously, with the first one achieving a diamond certification in the US. In our number 7 spot today, we have Elizabeth Short, or the Black Dahlia. This is one of the most famous cold cases ever, and that is because it is horrifying, extremely dark, and super mysterious. Elizabeth Short was an aspiring actor, but her life was cut tragically short by an incredibly inhumane act. Elizabeth's body was found when she was only 22 years old in a vacant lot near a park in Los Angeles in January of 1947. The crime was highly publicized because of how graphic it was, but whoever did this was sure to leave little to no evidence behind. A few days after the crime, someone claiming to be the person who committed this crime called to say that he would eventually turn himself in, but wanted police to search for a while. But he also said he would send in some of Beth Short's belongings. He did follow through on this and did send in things, such as her birth certificate, but this didn't end up giving investigators any leads. During the initial investigation, 60 different men confessed to this crime, and since then there have now been over 500 confessions, which is absolutely insane. There are honestly too many theories on this one to even get into right now, and it is quite possible that we may never know what exactly happened to Elizabeth. In our number 6 spot today, we have Jill Dando. Jill was an English journalist and a television presenter until she was killed outside of her southwest London home in 1999. 1989. This created the biggest manhunt the country had ever seen since the Yorkshire Ripper in the 70s. A man named Barry George was originally convicted and sentenced to prison for this terrible crime, but he ended up actually being acquitted years later, which now leaves this case unsolved. Jill's next door neighbor heard a surprised gasp from Jill, but he never heard like a shot, and it sounded more like someone who was greeting an old friend. The same neighbor looked out the window and actually saw whoever the killer is, but of course at the time they didn't know who he was or what had just happened, and he also didn't recognize the man, so unfortunately he was unable to give an identification. There are a ton of speculations and rumors about who took Jill's life, and it ranges from a potential stalker to maybe even like a crazy hit job. Hopefully one day there will be answers on why someone would have done something so horrible to Jill. In our number 5 spot today we have Patricia Meehan. This is a story that really just gives me the chills because the circumstances surrounding it are exceptionally strange. On April 20th, 1989, Patricia Bernadette Meehan was in a car accident on Highway 200 near Circle, Montana. Witnesses saw her driving her car on the wrong side of the road, which then led to her crashing into off-duty police dispatcher Carol Heights. Carol was luckily uninjured in the crash, and she got out of her vehicle right away. Upon exiting her vehicle, Carol saw Patricia also exit her vehicle, walk up to her, and just stare at her without saying a word. Patricia then walked away, climbed over a fence, and then stood staring at the accident before walking away and disappearing, which, like, literally just talking about it gives me goosebumps. It is so strange. A search began immediately but turned up little results. There have been thousands of reported sightings of Patricia that have potentially given police leads to her whereabouts, but she still has never been found. In our number 4 spot today we have the Mary Celeste. The Mary Celeste first set sail on November 17th, 1872 with a cargo full of alcohol. Whatever happened over the next month isn't quite clear, but what we do know is that on the afternoon of December 5th of the same year, another ship on the Atlantic crossing found her drifting somewhere between Azores and Portugal. The captain of this ship knew the captain of the Mary Celeste and knew that he was a skilled and capable sailor, so he was extremely suspicious. He ordered a crew to board the Mary Celeste, and when they did, they found that the ship had been deserted, but it was in full seaworthy condition, so why had they abandoned it? Especially the captain. The captain of the ship that found the derelict split his crew and sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar for more investigations, but despite this, the captain, his family, and the crew of 7 that were on board the Mary Celeste simply just disappeared, and no one knows what happened or where they could have gone. I think this one is so famous because it seemingly just has no answers tied to it at all. Like, it really is just one of those mysteries with next to nothing to go off in terms of any sort of clues. In our number 3 spot today we have the Yuba County 5. On February 24th, 1978, 5 men from Yuba City, California attended a basketball game at California State University. All 5 men went missing after this night, and several days later the group's car was found abandoned in a remote area of the Plumas National Forest that was way out of the way from where they should have been. There was no reason for the car to have been abandoned because it was in totally fine working condition when it was found. In June of 1978, 4 of the men were found passed away near a trailer camp that is deep in the forest, but the 5th man has never been found. There is a lot of strange information about this case, such as how one of the men starved to death even though he was surrounded by food. There is truly too much to cover about this story that I unfortunately don't have time for, but if you're interested I would highly recommend looking it up because this case is truly unexplainable and absolutely terrifying. In our number 2 spot today we have Jim Gray. Jim Gray was an incredibly important computer scientist who was responsible for many computer advancements that changed things for all of us. Other than being a computer scientist, he was also a really experienced and skilled sailor, and one day, on January 28th, 2007, he set sail for a short trip so he could head out and spread his mother's ashes as she had recently passed away. As his trip began, Jim spoke to his wife on the phone and said he would give her a call once he got back in range. After their phone call, he called his daughter as well and left a little message for her, and that was when he was off on his trip, but unfortunately he never ended up returning. Jim's wife Donna was the one who raised the alarm bells as she was away on a trip, but like I mentioned, Jim said he would call her later, and he never did. At this point is when huge searches began. Thousands of images of the area where Jim or his boat might be were uploaded to the Amazon Mechanical Turk for people to look through and see if they could find any kind of signs, but to no avail. Jim also had an automatic emergency position indicating beacon on his ship, but whatever happened to Jim and the ship clearly didn't meet the requirements, or perhaps it had some sort of malfunction, or maybe it was even turned off. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jim or his boat, as no sign or trace of either has ever been found. The theories of what may have happened are endless and range from Jim intentionally disappearing to him being kidnapped for his computer skills and brain in order to do some kind of inside job, and everything in between. There most definitely are theories that are seemingly more likely than others, but at the end of the day, they are all a possibility. In our number 1 spot today, we have Mauro de Moro. Moro was an Italian investigative journalist, and it is said that his profession is most likely what led to his disappearance. On the evening of September 16th, 1970, he was coming back home from work but never actually returned. Before his disappearance, he apparently was convinced that he had the story of a lifetime, and he even had told his co-workers that he had a story that was going to shake Italy. There are 3 main speculations and theories about what this story might have been and what could have happened. One theory is that the story could have been related to the death of a man named Enrico, who was the president of Italy's state-owned oil and gas conglomerate, ENI. The next was that his story could have been about finding a drug trafficking network between Sicily and the United States, and the final theory is that his disappearance might have been related to a failed right-wing coup that took place in the 70s. Despite extensive searches, he has never been found, and in fact 2 of the main detectives who started this case both had their lives taken by the mafia. It is believed that Moro was a victim of what is called lupara bianca, which is a journalistic term for when the mafia takes the life of someone in such a way that their body will never be found. Whatever story he was working on, we'll likely never know, and it's such a tragedy that a job he was so passionate about is most likely what led to his disappearance.
And we're starting off this list with encephalitis lethargica, also known as the sleeping sickness. This strange ailment swept across the world between 1917 and 1928, leaving medical professionals baffled and horrified. The epidemic affected millions of people with symptoms ranging from mild lethargy to severe cases of catatonia, where individuals would become completely motionless and unresponsive, almost like statues. The cause of the disease remained elusive as doctors struggled to find a definitive explanation for its origin and transmission. During the height of the epidemic, patients were observed in a trance-like state, often remaining immobile for weeks or even years. Some victims also experienced psychiatric symptoms such as hallucinations and delirium, and scientists had several theories including viral infections or exposure to toxins, but none could provide a definitive explanation. The epidemic gradually subsided by the late 1920s, with sporadic cases occurring afterward, and that might be the strangest thing about this one. It seemed to just flare up and then disappear. Next up, we have Overton Bridge. Fair warning, if you ever find yourself in Scotland with your pet dog, do not take it to this bridge. Dogs seem to really enjoy leaping off of it. Overton Bridge, located near Dumbarton in Scotland, has gained quite the reputation due to its mysterious phenomenon associated with it. For decades, the bridge has been the site of a large number of dog deaths. They just leap off the bridge, and as to why they do so, no one knows. The peculiar incidents date back to the 1950s, with over 50 dogs reportedly plunging from the same spot on the bridge. Even more strange is that dogs typically jump from the same side as well. Numerous theories have been proposed to try and explain the mystery surrounding the bridge. Some speculate that there may be an undetectable scent or maybe a sound that only dogs can hear that lures them to jump. Others have suggested supernatural or paranormal explanations, of course, but it still remains a mystery. Even after investigations, including studies by animal behaviorists and structural engineers. Number 8, the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. It's a very famous one. This has to be the most perplexing aviation mystery in recent history. On March 8th of 2014, the Boeing 777 with 239 passengers and crew members on board seemed to vanish without a trace. The flight was en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing when just a little under an hour after takeoff, it disappeared from radar screens, leaving behind no distress signals or communication indicating any issues on board. The search for Flight 370 started in the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea, which was when the captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, last made contact with air traffic control before the plane disappeared from screens. It was soon discovered that the plane actually made a sharp turn, redirecting its route completely, flying for several hours before it would have eventually run out of fuel over the vast expanse of the southern Indian Ocean, where satellite data suggested the plane had likely gone down. Despite extensive efforts involving multiple countries and cutting-edge technology, though, no wreckage was initially found. Of course, a bunch of theories started being proposed: possible mechanical failure, the captain deciding to take his own life as well as the crew, conspiracy theories involving government cover-ups, even a UFO abduction. The disappearance of Flight 370 has left the families of the victims behind, desperate for some kind of closure and resolution. The Mary Celeste. Alright, we have a ghost ship on the list. It's December 4th, 1872. A ship is found floating in the Atlantic Ocean, completely empty. Empty of crew and passengers, that is. Everything else was intact. All the cargo remained, and there was no damage to the vessel. The only thing missing was a single lifeboat. The ship had set sail from New York 1 month prior, led by Captain Benjamin Briggs, along with his wife, daughter, and 7 other crew members. To this day, nobody knows how or why everyone went missing. Some speculated that the ship could have been attacked by pirates, but there was no sign of a struggle, and the last entry on the ship's daily log was completely ordinary. There were no signs that anything was amiss. It seemed as if everyone had just boarded the lifeboat and sailed off, never to be seen or heard from again. And at number 6, we have the deaths of the Jameson family. Bobby Dale Jameson, his wife Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison vanished without a trace while on a trip to the rugged terrain of the San Bois Mountains in Oklahoma. The family's truck was discovered abandoned, and inside were their personal belongings, including wallets, $32,000 in cash, IDs, and their dog, who was fortunately still alive. There was no sign of a struggle in the truck, although police did find an 11-page hate letter written by Sherilyn to her husband. There was also surveillance footage taken outside of the Jamesons' home showing them making a number of trips from their property to the truck back and forth. They seemed to be moving in an almost trance-like state. So there were just so many ways that this thing could have gone, and it was impossible for authorities to actually figure out exactly what happened. The search for the Jameson family spanned months and involved extensive resources, but no sign of them was found until 4 years later, when the skeletal remains of the family was found just 3 miles from where their truck had been discovered. Authorities were never able to determine the cause of death, as their bodies were too decomposed, and to this day the circumstances surrounding their deaths are all but a mystery. Number 5, the feet mystery. Sounds pretty innocuous, but it's actually pretty disturbing. Since 2007, the discovery of severed feet along the coastlines of British Columbia have been found and remains a perplexing and eerie phenomenon till this day. The first severed foot was discovered by a young girl, of all people, in August of 2007 on Jedediah Island, and since then a total of 21 feet have been found in various locations along the coast. Speculation and theories have arisen, ranging from accidents at sea, of course foul play. Authorities have stated that they ruled out foul play, though, proposing that the feet most likely belonged to people who either took their own lives or died in accidents, and that the feet simply separated from the natural decomposition process, and then because they were in shoes, they remained buoyant and somewhat preserved until they finally floated onto shore. Extensive investigations examining missing persons cases, forensic analysis, and DNA testing were done, but there have still been no definitive answers. Number 4, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Keepers. Located on a remote island off the coast of Scotland, this lighthouse was manned by 3 experienced keepers: James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. On December 15th, a passing ship noticed that the lighthouse's light was not shining. A relief vessel was sent to investigate, only to find the island deserted and the keepers nowhere to be found. The lighthouse's door was unlocked and a meal lay unfinished. stretched on the table as if the keepers had just vanished abruptly out of thin air. Strangely, the logbook contained weird entries from December 12th describing severe storms and the men's increasingly erratic behavior. One entry mentioned something unusual, but its meaning was never deciphered. Various theories have emerged to explain the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers' disappearance. Some speculate that they were swept away in a storm, others suggest foul play, and of course, with any unexplained event like this, some think there could be a ghost in the mix. Until this day, though, no conclusive evidence or an explanation has ever been found. The mysterious deaths at Dyatlov Pass. In late January of 1959, a group of 10 hikers led by Igor Dyatlov set out on a challenging trek through the Ural Mountains in Soviet Russia. Tragically, their expedition took a horrific turn, apparently. When the hikers failed to report back as planned, a search party was sent out. What they discovered at Dyatlov Pass was a scene of utter terror. The hikers' tent had been torn open from the inside. The group's belongings were left behind, and the search continued. The bodies of the hikers were found scattered in the surrounding area, some partially clothed and exhibiting horrifying injuries. Some victims had fractured skulls, crushed chest, or unexplained internal injuries, as if subjected to extreme force. Some theories point to an avalanche or severe weather conditions, while others suggest a possible attack of some kind. I think possible is a bit of an understatement there. They were obviously attacked by someone or something. Some people even think, maybe it was UFOs or a Yeti. However, none of these theories have ever been proven. The death of Mary Reeser. In the early morning hours of July 2nd in Petersburg, Florida, Mary's landlord arrived at her apartment with a telegraph, only to discover that the doorknob was hot to the touch. So she phoned the police. Firefighters arrived on the scene. However, what they discovered inside defied all logic and explanation. Amidst the charred remains of a chair the widow had been sitting on was Mary's body, which had been reduced to a pile of ash, with only a portion of her left foot remaining intact. There's a photo of that online, by the way, if you feel like Googling it. Pretty disturbing. The strangest part of the case was that the surrounding area, including the furniture, nearby objects, even a stack of newspapers, was just unscathed by the fire that had consumed her body completely. Forensic experts were utterly confused by the area of the fire's impact. It seemed to have solely targeted Mary Reeser's body, while sparing everything else in the room. Of course, theories and speculation began to spread, including the controversial concept of spontaneous human combustion, which I always smile when I say, because it reminds me of Spinal Tap, but it would be horrifying if it actually happened in real life, as it might have here. I don't know. This theory suggests that individuals can suddenly just burst into flames without an external ignition source. Pretty weird. Finally, though, we have one of my favorite UFO abduction accounts, the Travis Walton case. On November 5th, 1975, Travis and his crew of fellow loggers were working in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona. They claimed to witness strange lights in the sky as they were driving back from their work site, and as they got closer to the light, they spotted a large glowing object hovering above the trees. Curiosity got the better of them, and Travis got out of the truck and approached the craft. The other guys were pleading with him to come back to the truck, and then all of a sudden Travis was hit by a beam of light and seemingly lifted into the air. Panicked and frightened, the remaining loggers just fled the scene, leaving Travis behind. They soon decided, though, to turn back and retrieve him, but Travis was no longer there. They later reported the incident to local authorities, sparking, of course, a search for Travis, which lasted for 5 days. Astonishingly, Travis reappeared unharmed, but deeply traumatized, recounting a bizarre tale of abduction and encounters with extraterrestrial beings. Short, bald, black eyes, your classic kind of gray alien. Makes this case even more interesting, though, is the corroboration by Travis's fellow loggers. All of them confirmed witnessing the same strange craft and the beam of light that struck Travis. They even took lie detector tests that all came back saying they were telling the truth, or at least believed that they had seen what they had had seen. Now, polygraph tests, they're not always 100% credible, but it is interesting that all of them came back positive. Also, there is a movie about the Travis Walton case called Fire in the Sky. Very creepy movie, so if you're interested in this case at all, definitely check that one out.
Coming in at number 10, we have what was before the Big Bang. The common consensus is that there was a massive event at the beginning of time that brought all of the universe into existence, and a bunch of stuff happened and then humans showed up. I hope you realize that I'm fast tracking this whole story a little bit. But some of the brightest minds on the planet have been able to use their collective intelligence to pull back the data to the point where the universe erupted from a condensed little sliver of explosion and fired out billions of galaxies across the ever-expanding universe, but everything that we understand about physics doesn't give us any information about what was before. Many scientists have uttered the words, "It doesn't make sense anymore." Man, that must be frustrating to just not be able to crack the code. My speculation is, and I come at this with zero knowledge of how the universe works, but that before the universe started, there was Samuel Jackson. Because that guy's everywhere. He's done like 200 movies. Coming in at number 9, we have dark matter. If you get into the world of science fiction, then you would have for sure heard of some character using dark matter for something, and it's usually very dangerous for whatever reason. And why is that? Well, here's the thing, scientists still don't know what dark matter is. They have never been able to bottle the stuff and look at it closely, but the universe shows a lot of signs that it does exist. The speculation as to what dark matter is basically a web of particles so plentiful that it holds the universe together. To give you perspective, what we can see in the universe, the stars, the planets, the moons, all of that only takes up about 5% of the endless void. Now, dark matter is thought to take up 25% of the space. There's speculation that dark matter has a gravitational pull, and that's why people think it props up the universe. Other people think that dark matter is an undiscovered property of gravity. Really, we have no idea what's going on, so when you read a science fiction book and they talk about dark matter, remember that the writer has no idea either. At number 8, we have why do we sleep? Well, because Stone Cold said so. That's a super old reference that probably no one will know, but this has been a question that has baffled scientists for an extremely long time. We know the benefits of sleep. When you sleep, your body repairs itself. Sleep is good for your cognitive function. Sleep helps your brain get in information. I could go on for 20 videos about all the scientific evidence about how important sleep is for your health. In fact, getting better sleep is the easiest and cheapest way to get healthier, but the question still stands. Why? There are other organisms on the planet that never need to sleep, like bullfrogs, who won't fall asleep but they go into a rest state. There's a lot of speculation. Some people think that because our bodies are so much more complex, but they still come from the same genetic soup as a lot of the other things on this planet, our cells can't run something this powerful without taking a break. Other people think that this was some sort of defense mechanism created to wait out predators, but in the end, we still don't have the answers. Coming in at number 7, we have the multiverse theory. Now, I want to start off by saying that this theory is still very unproven. It is all speculation. There are some microwave signals that come from the universe, and some scientists think this is evidence of other universes, but it's not like gravity, where we know it's real, we just don't know why. The multiverse theory is that, very much like the infinite expanding universe, there's also an infinite number of other universes that have all different variations of reality, which is pretty much the backbone of the show Rick and Morty. This could mean that there is a universe where you are the hot chick, so feel good about yourself. Now, even if this theory was true, it wouldn't be easy to go visit these places. Beyond the fact that we would have to build something to open a gate to these worlds, the laws of physics that bind these other universes together could be so different from our own that going to them would literally tear your atoms apart. At number 6, we have why does time flow forward? Well, what is perceived as forward, you feel me? I mean, when I first was reading about this, I thought, well, because it does. It can only move one way. But why is the ultimate question. I think that's why I never became a scientist, because I never think to ask these questions. Newton wrote, all motion may be accelerated or slowed, but the flowing of absolute time is not liable to any change. And it's even in question, how could you measure the flow of time? I mean, time could stop moving right now and then start moving the very next second, and we would never be able to tell the difference because our lives continue no matter what. So maybe this is a question that doesn't need to be asked, but I'm glad that we're asking it, because one day I would like to go back in time so I can go to Woodstock. Coming in at number 5, we have how does gravity work? I mean, if you ask a flat earther, they'll tell you that gravity is fake and we're all held down by wind or some nonsense, but thankfully over here at Most Amazing Top 10, we don't use flat earth science. Now we do know the effects of gravity. It basically pulls things in, and the more mass something has, the stronger its gravitational pull. Like the moon is smaller than the earth, so if you go up there and jump around, you will feel like you should be playing for the NBA. Gravity even has a massive effect on how the planet acts. The moon's gravitational pull will pull in and out the tides, but why? Why does this happen? Coming in at number 4, we have why do magnets exist? Now we do know a lot about magnets. I mean, you can give them to a child and they can easily figure out how the opposite forces of a magnet will connect to one another and the same sides reject each other, like the majority of people I message on dating apps. We know that there are magnetic poles on each side of the planet, and we know that the electromagnetic force is one of the largest forces in the universe. But we are still left scratching our heads when it comes to the terms as to why they are here. Magnetism is one of the great underlying forces of the universe, and unlocking this one could answer a ton of questions about existence itself. Coming in at number 3, we have the placebo effect. The mind is a very powerful thing, and if you ever needed evidence, just look at the countless studies on the placebo effect. One of the craziest studies was one done on arthroscopic knee surgery. This is a common practice in older people with knee problems. A very simple surgery will be performed where 2 incisions are made on each side of the knee, and a doctor goes in and cleans out fluid and cleans up cartilage in the knee. Now the purpose of this study was to find out what was more effective, the cleaning of the cartilage or the cleaning of the fluid. In order for the study to be successful, there was a control group that was given a mock surgery without their knowledge. Slits were made on the side of the knee, and even a fake surgery was shown on a screen for the patient to watch, but no actual surgery was performed. And the control group recovered just as well, and in some cases better, than the people who had the surgery. So in other words, the mind repaired the body somehow. Now how this happens, we don't know, but it goes to show how much your thoughts can have influence over your body. Coming in at number 2, we have dark energy. Now it sounds like we're gonna go into a Marvel movie or something. What on earth is dark energy? Well, have you been paying attention to the list so far? We don't know what it is. And when I say we, I mean people much smarter than me. But we speculate that dark energy is what makes up the other 70% of the universe. Now, since the universe is constantly expanding like my gut after I refuse to listen to my own body's signals to stop eating, there needs to be some explanation as to why this is happening. The speculation is that dark energy is the cause of this never-ending growth spurt. Dark energy could be created by quantum particles smashing into each other all over the known universe. This is happening so many times that it would take a good portion of this video just to count all the zeros. But these collisions create energy, which in turn is pushing the universe apart. The question is, how far can the known universe get pushed? Could it get pushed to the point where reality is ripped apart? I don't know, I'm not smart enough to answer this. And coming in for the number 1 spot is quantum entanglement. Now it sounds like I'm just making this stuff up, but I promise you I am not. This is very real. Quantum entanglement is when 2 particles that are nowhere near each other will start to mirror each other. Now why is this strange? Well, because it was long thought that only something within a particle's environment could affect it. On top of this, the only way that particles could be doing this is if they were communicating in some way to one another, like they were hooked up on WhatsApp or something. But here's the thing, these particles are so far apart and moving together so perfectly that the speed in which they would have to be sending information breaks the laws of physics. The information would have to move faster than the speed of light, which was thought to be impossible. Now, how is this happening? Once again, we have no idea, but it begs the question, will we one day be able to move faster than the speed of light? I hope so, because that would be cool.
Coming into number 10, we have Where is Cynthia? This is a very bizarre missing persons case that was also featured on US TV show Unsolved Mysteries. Cynthia Anderson was a legal secretary from Ohio in 1980. The 20-year-old loved crime and romance novels, but began having a reoccurring dream that an intruder entered her home. She told her mother about it, but she didn't think too much of it until she started receiving weird phone calls at work. Her employers even went as far as to have an emergency buzzer installed on her desk. On the morning of August 4th, 1981, she wasn't at work, but her car was in the car park. On her desk was a novel that she was reading, but the page was open on a passage that detailed an abduction. A month later, the local police started getting weird calls saying that Cynthia was being held in a basement, but wouldn't give any further detail. To this day, she's never been found, and that case is cold. Coming into number 9, we have Who Shot Tupac? But like, who? Tupac Shakur was one of the most famous rappers in the world when he was in Las Vegas in September 1996, nearly 23 years ago to the day. He was just 25 years old when he was gunned down in Vegas, having seen Mike Tyson and Frank Bruno fight, which must have been epic. As Tupac and his entourage stopped at a red light in the Flamenco Road and Koval Lane area, he was 4 times. He died 6 days later and was not in a state to identify his killer. Earlier that night, it was reported that the rapper had beef with the street gang. They could have had something to do with it, we'll just never know. A witness came forward, but then they were in New Jersey, thousands of miles away, before they could even submit to further police questioning and identify a suspect. Of course, there are people out there that still believe Tupac is alive and living under a new identity. Perhaps we'll never know. Coming into number 8, we have the Children of Hamelin. So you guys may have heard of the Pied Piper, a little fairy tale with a pretty key moral at the end of it. Pay your bills, if not a bohemian musician will steal your kids. Right? Well, it turns out that there is more than just a lesson to this story. There is actually an 800-year-old unsolved mystery. You see, the Pied Piper of Hamelin was actually a real man, a piper dressed in exuberant clothing who turned up in Lower Saxony in the village of Saxon itself in 1284. According to church records, he did steal 130 children from the town who were never seen or heard from again. They were simply spirited away. But were they? We just don't know. Coming into number 7, we have Stonehenge. We're taking it back to my home country of England, but what is going on? What's going on with Stonehenge? I don't know. Stonehenge sits pretty in the Salisbury Plains in England and was laid out around 4,000 years ago at a time where transporting and lifting 50-ton sarsen sandstone and bluestone rocks was legitimately beyond human capability. Aside from the mystery of how it was built, we also don't know what it was used for. The main theory is that it was for some kind of religious worship, although there were far more cosmic suggestions. The structure is aligned with various celestial objects and has been the focus of pagan celebration, especially around the summer solstice. Archaeological digs have also suggested that a breed of giant cows were used either to assist in the construction or, were just chilling there, present, mooing. Cows are just so great. Does anyone ever just stop and think about cows? I love cows, even ancient giant cows. Cows! Moo. Recently discovered underneath the stone structure were 17 further mysterious ancient monuments, which just adds more mystery to the pile of mystery. It's a mystery sundae with a side of mystery and a mystery cherry on top. Coming in at number 6, we have the Zodiac. The Zodiac is one of the most elusive in modern American history. The mystery male murdered at least 5 people, but claims to be behind the deaths of up to 37 people. Despite no arrests, the California Department of Justice has maintained an open case file on the Zodiac since 1969. The Zodiac 3 women and 1 man, with 2 other male victims surviving. They claim to have killed many people in the infamous ciphers which were sent to the police. The Zodiac given their name as a result of the cryptograms sent to the police, which were a mystery unto themselves. One of those has definitely been solved, but the others not so much. The last known Zodiac in the 1970s, so in theory the could be dead, or they could be living out their days among us, which is terrifying. So yeah, despite descriptions of the male at the time and many sketches of him, the case is unsolved and the is, or was, at large. This is so mysterious. At number 5, we have the Texarkana Moonlight. Who was the Phantom Slayer? Honestly, we don't know. The Texarkana Moonlight were a series of very grisly that took place in Texas in the spring of 1946. 8 people were attacked over 10 weeks, with 5 of the victims succumbing to their injuries. A pair of survivors claimed that the killer was wearing a white pillowcase with eye holes cut out over his head. What a ghoul. All of the attacks happened to couples and took place on weekends. The sent the town of Texarkana into absolute panic, as I'm sure you can imagine. City inhabitants locked themselves indoors with guns, and it was kind of like scenes from The Purge out there. The Texas Rangers were even called in, and people started arming up and taking to the streets to try and catch the killer, but the assailant never struck again. At the time, the Texas Ranger captain saw that the criminal killer was, and I quote, a shrewd criminal who left no stone unturned to conceal his identity and activities. He was never caught. Coming into number 4, we have the Dark Deaths of Overton Bridge. I've never heard of a dog taking their own life until now, but it seems that there's a bridge in Dumbarton in beautiful Scotland which is A, haunted, and B, has claimed the lives of many dogs. This makes me feel really sad. It seems that since the 1960s, nearly 100 dogs have leapt to their death from the bridge, falling 50 feet into jagged rock below. Why the dogs have jumped? We just don't know. Reportedly, they freak out and they leap. The Scottish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals has sent teams to investigate, but nobody has yet solved the mystery. While the dog deaths are the main issue, it seems that a man inexplicably threw his from the bridge in 1994. Now dogs are firmly required to be on leashes. Coming into number 3, we have the Phoenix Lights. What was going on in the skies of Arizona, Nevada, and Sonora? In 1997, thousands of people saw what they thought were UFOs in the sky between 7:30 and 10 p.m. at night. Thousands of people reported triangular formations of lights passing over the southern states and in North Mexico. A sizable number of people also reported actually seeing a UFO. One witness, who didn't want to be named, which I kind of understand, said, "It was totally silent. I've never seen anything close to the colours from the exhaust that propelled that thing. It was as big as downtown Prescott and completely blocked out the stars." Now the shared phenomenon actually had a lot of credible witnesses, including the Arizona Governor Fife Symington. While the original event happened 22 years ago, possible reoccurrences have happened in 2007 and 2008. Coming into number 2, we have the case of D.B. Cooper. On November the 24th, 1971, the eve of Thanksgiving, a man using the name Dan Cooper successfully hijacked a Boeing 727 plane in the airspace between Portland and Seattle. The man boarded the plane as a passenger and ordered a bourbon and soda. After takeoff, he handed a note to a flight attendant, but she didn't read it, assuming it was his phone number. Creepy. He then leant over to her and said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a not what you want to hear." Long story short, he demanded and successfully extorted $200,000 in ransom, over $1 million in today's currency. He then parachuted out of the plane, jettisoned, gone. Nobody knew whether he landed alive or where he was at all. There was an extensive manhunt from the FBI, but the man's real identity has never been solved. Numerous theories were circulated. The serial number on the cash he stole were also released and searched for, but again, no trace was found. As of 2016, the investigation has been suspended and remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. Finally, coming into number 1, a mystery of our age, we have the disappearance of flight MH370. Malaysian Airlines 370 disappeared on March the 8th, 2014, flying from Kuala Lumpur Airport to Beijing in China. The aircraft last made contact with air traffic control when it was over the South China Sea, less than an hour after takeoff, before then completely disappearing from their radar. The last words from Captain Shah were, "Good night, Malaysian 370. The plane was still tracked on military radar, which suggested that actually it deviated to cross the Malay Peninsula, until finally disappearing from radar altogether over the Andaman Sea. Oddly, no phone calls of distress or signals were sent out or anything like that. No word. Silence. The black box could have shed light on what happened, but it was never found. Neither was the plane or its wreckage, despite millions of dollars being spent on finding it.
The Sauter children come onto this list in at number 9. At 1 a.m. on Christmas Eve, the Sauter family woke up to find their home was on fire. The parents managed to get 4 of their 9 children out of the house safely, but there were still 5 children supposedly inside. The father rushed to grab the ladder, but it was gone. He then tried to move one of his trucks, but they all failed to start. The family tried calling the fire department, but there was no response. Eventually the neighbors saw the smoke and flames, so they called the fire department, who arrived 7 hours after the fire had burned out on its own. Even though the bodies or bones were never found, but it was deemed that they died in the fire. According to some investigators, it is almost impossible that the fire was hot enough to burn their bones and bodies, so what really happened to these 5 children? Apparently after the children vanished, people had reported seeing them all over America, so now it's commonly believed that these kids were kidnapped and given new identities. mysteries. Moving into number 8, we have this incident that happened in Russia. A group of college students wanted to go on a camping trip on a popular Russian mountain. So they hiked up the mountainside and they set up their camp, but they didn't know that no one would ever hear from them again. And that's because another group discovered their bodies when they were hiking up the mountains. When investigators arrived on the scene, the first thing they noticed that there was a tent cut open from the inside and all of their belongings and most of their shoes were left in the tent. So one girl was found without a tongue, her eyes, part of her lip, and the others were found in nothing but their underwear. No one knows what happened that day or who committed these violent slayings. All I know for sure is that I don't want to be hiking up this mountain anytime soon because I don't know what the heck is going on. The Voynich manuscript makes its way into number 7. This is a very mysterious book that has been dated back to the 15th century, but nobody knows who made it or where it even came from. There are over 200 pages of random drawings, codes, receipts, and notes. The entire book is written in an unknown language and the pictures of the flowers and creatures don't even exist on Earth. This manuscript has been passed to a bunch of different experts who are unable to decipher anything in this book. Some people believe that it is written in a secret language, while others believe that it came from a lost civilization, and there are those people who think that this book came from aliens. Which theory do you guys agree with? Let me know in the comment section below. Confusing us in at number 6, we have the Bermuda Triangle. This is a mysterious and strange area that spans about 500,000 square miles off the southeastern tip of Miami to Bermuda and Puerto Rico, where dozens of ships and airplanes have disappeared without a trace. This actually confuses me, like what is going on down there? Ships and planes have vanished from the area even when the weather is good and without them sending a distress signal. As far as we know, 75 planes and hundreds of ships have mysteriously vanished in the Bermuda Triangle, and there are a lot of conspiracy theories that try to explain this phenomenon. Some people say that it's because of paranormal reasons, others say electromagnetic interference, it could be because of bad weather, or because of the Gulf Stream. Despite all of these proposed explanations, no one is sure what is causing all of these disappearances, and you know what? I think it's a simple answer. I blame it on aliens. The Pollock twins creep into number 5. They were two English girls who were often regarded as proof of reincarnation. Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock were fatally hit by a car while they were walking to church with one of their friends. The girl was very close to her parents, so when they passed away, the family had an extremely difficult time coping with their death. The parents wanted nothing more but to have them back, and the father said that they would have another set of girls soon. Well, that following year, the mother got pregnant and gave birth to identical twin girls named Jillian and Jennifer. What makes things even more strange is that one of the girls has a birthmark on her waist that matched the birthmark that Jacqueline had. Jacqueline had also had a birthmark on her forehead that resembled the scar that Jacqueline had. When they were 2 years old, they began asking for toys that belonged to the sisters who died, despite them never seeing the toys before. And oh yeah, they would always panic when they saw moving cars, and they would scream, "The car is coming to get us." So many people said that they were reincarnations and their memories and souls are living on. Next up, number 4, we have the Green Children. During the 12th century, 2 children mysteriously appeared in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, England. The little boy and girl spoke in an unusual language. They wore strange clothes and only ate raw beans. Oh, and their skin was also green. The little boy died later of an unknown illness, but the little girl survived and she eventually learned how to speak English. She told the villagers that she came from an underground world where everyone was green and the sun never came up. She said that they were in a tunnel taking care of their father's cattle when they heard the bells of a church ring, so they decided to follow it. She said that they entered a narrow opening in the cave and crawled deeper and deeper into the darkness until they saw a flash of light. Modern researchers are trying to come out with a bunch of explanations for this story, but they can't say for certain where these green people came from. Jack the Ripper slashes into number 3. This is probably one of the most notorious and infamous mysteries of all time. Jack the Ripper is an unidentified who terrorized the streets of Whitechapel in London in 1888. Jack the Ripper was responsible for the brutal he was before their organs. There is little information about this, and authorities believe that he could have many other victims. What makes this case so eerie is despite all of the man hours put into this case, we've never been able to identify Jack the Ripper. There are so many conspiracy theories about his identity, and some people believe that the royal family was in on it, or the famous author Lewis Carroll was the true murderer. There are even cryptic letters sent to the police that described his slayings, but we were still no closer to finding out his true identity. Flying into number 2, we have Flight MH370. This case has been one of the world's greatest aviation mysteries when it disappeared without a trace on March 8th, 2014. So this is just like 4 years ago. The Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur and was headed to Beijing, but Malaysia Airlines lost contact with the plane and it was never heard from again. Authorities have claimed that just before they lost contact, they heard "Good night Malaysian 370" from either the pilot or the co-pilot. Experts have determined that the plane probably flew for 7 hours before the fuel would have ran out, and then they most likely crashed 1,000 miles west of Perth, Australia. However, despite huge search parties, they were unable to find the wreckage of the plane. People believe that the pilot went on a suicide mission and planned the killing himself, and the other 238 passengers on the plane, but this is all speculation, and this mystery will probably never be solved. And finally, in at number 1 spot, we have the Zodiac letters. We've talked about the Zodiac many times on this channel, but the Zodiac killer's identity has never been discovered, but what we know is that he committed his murder spree in Northern California from late 1960s to the early 1970s. He has at least 5 people, severely injured too, but authorities believe that he could be responsible for maybe 20 to 28 other. I mean, is this real life right now? The name Zodiac originated from the killer who sent several cryptic and taunting letters to the local newspaper. His letters were written in 2 parts. The first part was usually written in plain text, while the other part written in ciphers, which apparently contained his identity. In the first part of the letters, he would threaten the newspapers to publish his letters or else he would kill more people, and in the other part, he listed the names of his next victims in code. These letters all had cryptograms, and only one of these puzzles have been solved today.